Very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you in different countries. Thank you for joining in this international webinar on the theme Unpacking Relationship between Women and Children in ECCE. For your information, this webinar to celebrating National Mothers and Women's
Very good
Day.
morning,
Semo Cecep want
good
to
afternoon,
provide a
good
space
evening
to
to
discuss
all of
about
you
the
in different
complex
countries.
relationship women and
Thank you
children
for
in
joining in this
ECCE.
international webinar on the theme Unpacking
Okay, ladies
Relationship
and gentlemen,
between
before
Women and Children
starting
in
this
ECCE.
international webinar,
For your
please
information,
kindly
this
adjust
webinar
your
to
position
celebrating
and
National
kindly turn
Mothers
on your
and Women's
camera
Day. Good morning,
during this
Semo
session
Cecep
and
want
make
to
sure that
provide
your microphone is mute. Okay, I will repeat again. Please kindly adjust your position and kindly turn on your camera during this session and make sure that your microphone is mute. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Welcome to our Director of Simeo Cecep, Professor Vina Adriani. Good morning.
Very good morning. Thank you.
Welcome to our Deputy Director for Program, Simeo Cecep, Mr. Itfuti. Good morning, Mr.
Good morning, Nisa. Thank you.
Okay, welcome to our Deputy Director of Administration, Dr. Elis Rosdiawati. And also welcome to our speaker, Professor Ian Newberry from University of Lethbridge, Canada. Good morning, Professor.
Morning.
Nice to meet you. Welcome to our Xiaomi Cecep Head Division and team, and also welcome to committee and all participants of international webinar Unpacking Relationship between Women and Children in ECCE. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce myself. My name is Anissa. I'm from Knowledge Management Staff of Simeo Cecep, and I will be the master of ceremony of today's meeting. Okay, and then this webinar will deliver in English, and this webinar streaming on YouTube and Facebook channel. We seek your consent containing this method. Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, entering the first agenda, please sit it to the national anthem of Indonesia, followed by Semau color of entrance and Semau song.
It's time to open our eyes to a bright and promising future. We'll rise to the call of the times and create a stronger tomorrow. Let's start to make a difference, teaching everyone to learn through science, health, and technology. We will share our expertise by promoting knowledge and policies. We can build a better world. Let us take a stand for our visions alone, making future plans for the people to grow in a life filled with happiness and great. Here I send you, building the future is our legacy. We'll achieve our goals through partnership, creating opportunities. By working hand in hand, we can accomplish all our dreams. For a better quality of life is now within our reach. Let us take a stand for our visions alone, making future plans for the people to grow in a life filled with happiness and great. Here I send you, building the future is our legacy. Let us take a stand for our visions alone, making future plans for the people to grow in a life filled with happiness and great. Here I send you, building the future is our legacy. Building the future is
Lisa, your voice.
I'm sorry. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, may we invite the CMOCCEP director to deliver her welcoming remarks for Professor Vida Andriani. Times is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mbak Anissa. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan, Rahayu, Shalom, Sampurasun. Yeah. A very good morning, first of all, to our distinguished keynote speaker, Professor Yan Newberry. It is truly an honor for me to welcome you. Still not in person, Ibu. I really hope that one day I will be able to welcome you in person. So, Professor Yan Newberry is a very distinguished scholar, and I think if you don't mind, I consider you as one of my mentor in academics. So for you to be able to accept our invitation, I'm really honored for that. And I also would like to extend my warmest welcome to all the participants. According to the committee, actually we have 250, more than 250 participants registering for this event. But I think up to now, maybe we have 66 participants who have joined us online. I believe that maybe later on, we will be expecting more participants to join us. From the list of participants, I've noticed that there are participants from the universities and also from the NGOs. I think there are some counterparts, some partners from overseas, like we have a partner from UNICEF Mongolia, who are joining today's event, and also another participants, and also we have number of participants from the district government. So for your kind information, Professor Newberry, CMSHF is a regional center at Southeast Asian. It is the center under the Ministry of Education organization, and our main responsibility is to act sort of like a hub that connecting between research and policymaker. So being myself, my background itself is an academic. So for me, it is really a new experience and also a new challenge. And it makes me realize the distance between the research world and also the policy world. And I'm hoping that today's discussion is one of an attempt to connect between the two. And in Indonesia, as perhaps you know, and also our participants know, that today we are celebrating a Women's National Day. The term Women's National Day has been sort of like often understood as Mother's Day, while historically speaking, we all know that 22 December is to commemorate the first Women's Conference in Indonesia. And I think it is important during this day for us to sort of like reclaim the meaning of the Women's National Day. And ECCE, I think, is a kind of a perfect space for us to really questioning the meaning of 22nd December and what it and to understand the pervasiveness of the discourse of motherhood and how it impacts early childhood education. I'm not going to talk more because I'm sure that the participants, they don't want to hear me, but they look forward for your keynote, Ibu Yan Newberry. But I'm really hoping that today's webinar will allow us to reflect the kind of existing practice in early childhood education, why there has been a very pervasive feminization of early childhood education, and how does it impact the welfare of the teachers who are mostly female, and also the well-being of the children. So without further delay, I would like to officially open our webinar, and I'm really hoping that the discussion resulting from today's webinar will allow us to rethink what it means, how to navigate the feminization of early childhood education in a way that it fulfills both children's rights and also women's rights. So once again, thank you very much, especially to Professor Newberry and all two participants who have kindly joined our webinar. And of course, last but not the least, I also would like to extend my gratitude to all the committee who have prepared this event. So once again, thank you very much. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Shanti Shanti Om.
Thank you very much, Professor Vina, for a welcoming remark. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to have a group picture for today's meeting. Please kindly turn on your camera. Prepare your bright smile today. Okay, we have three pages because you do know where you are, so please hold on your smile. Okay, Mr. Iwan, please help me to screenshot this. Okay, I will on my count 1, 2, 3. Okay, in the next pages, 1, 2, 3, and then the last 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, moving the next agenda, please allow me to introduce my friend. Her name, I'm sorry, her name is Asila Priyangi, in our moderator for today's meeting. Asila Priyangi is one of same colleague as a capacity building officer, and she was working kindergarten teacher in one of private kindergarten in Bandung City for almost 9 years. And also in 2017 until 2020, she was becoming to double degree student in Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia and also Hiroshima University. She has becoming the project manager in capacity building division of Simeo CCEP, which aims to make a ECCE teacher training module within the children's right and holistic integrated framework called Our Happy Neighborhood. Ms. Asila Priyangi, time is yours.
Thank you very much, Mbak Anissa, for your kind introduction. Very good morning to all the participants here. Thank you very much. It is such a great honor for me to be your moderator today. I would like to send my warm greeting also to our honorable speakers, Professor Ian Newberry, who is already joining us today. Thank you for your time and joining us in our webinar today. I would like to introduce slide CV from Professor Jan Newberry. She is a cultural anthropologist who has worked in Java, Indonesia since 1992. Her book, Backdoor Java, State Formation and the Domestic in Working Class Java, written in 2006, considered the role of neighborhood women in managing their communities. She has been a fellow at the Asia Research Institute of the National University of Singapore and at KITLV/Royal Netherlands Institute of Southeast Asian and Caribbean Studies. She is the co-founder of the Institute for Child and Youth Studies at the University of Lethbridge. Let me inform you about a long list of her publication. But since we have a limited time here, I would like to read or inform you some of the recent publication that she has made. In 2018, she has published an article entitled "A Kampung Corner in Structure Affect Informality for Special Issue Cultures and Politics of Indonesian Infrastructure." And then in 2019, she has published an article entitled Grading Sweetgrass Families, a transmedia project on parenting in Blackfoot territory. And then in 2020, she has also published Women and Children First, Species Being and the Temporality of Socially Necessary Labor. And the news and recent article, she has been published together with our director, Professor Vina Adriani. The article is entitled Neuroscience and the Construction of a New Child in Early Childhood Education, a Neoliberal Legacy. That's the brief curriculum vitae of Ibu Ian. May I call you Ibu Ian? Okay. Without further delay, I would like to invite Ibu Ian to present her presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Asila. And I'm going to try to, thanks for inviting me. I'm going to try and share my screen, and I always make a mistake the first time. So let's see if I can do it the right way. And then start my slideshow. Let's see if it works. So do you see a slide on your screen? Yay, wonderful. So selamat pagi dan terima kasih atas kedatangan yang baik. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join you for this international webinar. organized by Simeo Chichip in celebration of Hari Kartini, or National Women's Day. My special thanks to Dr. Vina Adriani, who is a treasured colleague and collaborator. I welcome the opportunity to speak to today's topic, unpacking the relationship between women and children in ECCE. So I am going to start off and try to be a little brave. So see what you think. Marilah hai semua rakyat Indonesia, membangun segera, membangun keluarga yang sejahtera dengan PKK. So I'm sure you will recognize the Mars PKK, or the PKK March. I sang it many times with groups of women gathered for the monthly meetings of Pembinaan Kesejahteraan Keluarga, or the Family Welfare Movement, or as I translated it, Support for the Prosperous Family. This is a state-sponsored organization of women to support community development and welfare. And like the woman depicted in this billboard from Yogyakarta, the women of PKK were symbols of Indonesia's national modernization and the central importance of the ibu, or mother, and family to it. The PKK March and this billboard were meant to be symbols of unity, bringing Indonesians together. Even the tourist postcards in the 1990s foregrounded the traditional ibu in her kebaya as an unchanging symbol of Indonesia. The role of women as wives and mothers was made very clear in the national breastfeeding program that was going on during the early 1990s when I first did research in Central Java. The sign makes the point: I love my mother, I love my wife, I love Indonesia. The conflation of these forms of love and care has been mobilized by the Indonesian state for decades, both before and after the era of democratic reform. So today, I want to talk a little bit about what I learned about PKK and what it did for women and for the Indonesian state. I will use this background to consider the shift from a focus on women in development to one centered on the child and early childhood education. One of my goals here is to highlight the making of an unnecessary binary opposition between love and care and between women and children. I will use the idea of regimes of value to illustrate some of the contradictions in how we value some kinds of exchange and not others. So, as you heard in the very kind introduction, I'm an anthropologist. And so I conducted ethnographic fieldwork. This early work appeared in book form. And I used the idea of the importance of the back door in a kampung house to connect it to the greater community, a theme that I've returned to throughout my research career. To do my research, I lived in a lower class urban neighborhood, or kampung, in Yogyakarta. This is in Central Java for those who come from away. For almost a year and a half, I tried to live as a Javanese housewife. This meant shopping and cooking and cleaning. And this kind of participant observation is how anthropologists try to understand the everyday lives of different groups. As a famous anthropologist once said, sometimes it's important to put down the pencil and paper and take part. In fact, to do ethnographic fieldwork is to develop relationships, often long-lasting ones, with the people that you live among. So here's my whole family taking part in a wedding. And here you see the family that supported me in my work and that remains part of my life today. The Ibu you see on the right taught me so much about so many things, including PKK. I used a few other methods in my initial field work to try and understand women's lives and experience. For example, I conducted census-style interviews with women in my kampung about their histories of work and birth. The women I interviewed would tell me when they married, how many children they had, and what kinds of work they did. I also conducted short interviews with the market women who sold at the local pasar or market. But I was specifically interested in PKK and how it was used by the Indonesian government to organize women's voluntary labor to care for their families and their communities. So I attended many meetings, talked to women, and collected the materials distributed by the government. Here you can see how the ibu or mother was central to the idea of PKK and the delivery of what we now would call care labor. But my central method was participant observation. And so here are some of the women from the PKK section in my neighborhood at a monthly meeting. PKK is actually based on an imported set of ideas from the West about the role of women and mothers in the home and all the kinds of care that a mother was responsible for. Here you can see a page from a PKK pamphlet and how it mirrors a 19th century Victorian depiction of European women in similar roles. This particular idea about women's proper role and proper work in the domestic sphere in the West actually denied the working lives of lower class women there, even as the ideology of the domestic angel swept across the global South through colonialism, as we see here. I discovered that this view of women's roles also masked a history of Javanese women being economically active and working outside the home. And yet the idea of the ibu rumah tangga, the housewife, was actively promoted by the modernizing Indonesian state. In my conversations with kampung women, I found that the idea of a housewife was a new one to them. In fact, they liked this term much more than the one they'd been using for their own situation, unemployed. The women I spoke to actually made fun of PKK and the other program based on women's work, Dharma Wanita, and calling one drama Wanita and the other women without enough work to do. And yet PKK offered an important solution to the Indonesian economy. It put women in the household at the center of social reproduction and community welfare work, and it took them out of competition with the male labor force. Even so, the Indonesian government didn't just place women in the household to support their families and communities. It also actively supported women's work in the informal sector through PKK training and small funds. So if women were housewives, they were still making money through small-scale enterprises and sharing funds through community arisan. Whatever women thought of PKK, it helped them. Local women dealt with all kinds of responsibilities by using the structure of PKK. For example, I saw the women of PKK in my local community organize the Feast for Lebaran for the whole community as a way to lighten their individual role of providing food to friends and family and neighbors. In my work, I used social reproduction theory. SRT is based on the idea that there are some tasks that must be done, that must be completed: feeding, clothing, housing, and educating humans. Significantly, these are the central tasks for reproducing any human society. But the central question of social reproduction theory asks, who benefits from this work when it is not compensated by wages? The Indonesian case offers an answer. One of the comparative advantages of Indonesia in the global economy is its low-cost wages. This is based in part on surplus labor. Think here of all the young people and men who are unemployed or underemployed in Indonesia. How do they survive? Typically, they live in households where they get the food, clothing, and housing they need for little or no cost because it is subsidized by the work of others in the family or the household, like the PKK Ibu. So the argument I made in my original research was that PKK was how the Indonesian state organized low-cost social reproduction. In other words, they exploited the care labor of women to keep wages low and support low-cost reproduction of the labor force. That was the argument I initially made. Many years later, I took up another research project, one that considered the emergence of early childhood care and education in programs in the early 2000s in Indonesia and elsewhere. The importance of support for early childhood care and development and education was identified across intergovernmental organizations in the early 2000s, and most of you will be aware of this. But the shift in my focus to ECCE was caused by changes in Indonesia. I noticed that democratization in the era of reformasi was occurring at the same time as the global shift towards early childhood education and care. My work in the early 2000s looked at all the new programs for early childhood appearing in Jogja and the surrounding area. There were two very different approaches to these programs that I observed. Many were the result of activists associated with the democratization movement who were trying to change education, particularly for poor communities. But there was also evidence of educational entrepreneurialism in privatized programs aimed at the middle class. And you can see examples of both here in the pictures that I'm sharing with you. Yet despite this era of dramatic change in Indonesia, there were many continuities because what I saw again in 2007 was that the labor of women of PKK was used to deliver new PAUD early childhood programs in response to neoliberal globalization, just as it had been used for modernization and development in the 90s, demonstrating the durability of these forms of care. In both cases, the women were paid very poorly, if at all. Like my earlier work, I came to this new focus on ECCE and early childhood with an anthropological and ethnographic lens, one that also considered the impact of the global political economy as anthropologists were doing. And so here are two books that I was deeply influenced by. But drawing on my own earlier work on development, it was interesting to me that there was a shift from an emphasis on women in development, something I was familiar with. And you can see here, I drew on a piece by Razavi and Miller, who consider how there was an emphasis on women in development in the 1960s and 70s, and that shifted in the 1990s to an emphasis on gender and development. We know, those of us who do work in international development, that a focus on helping women helps families and communities. We know that help that is given to women trickles out and is amplified and supports the whole family and the community. So it was something of a shock to see that emphasis shifting again, this time to be on the child rather than the woman in the 2000s, the early 2000s. Even so, it's important to remember that international intervention in the global South has often focused on children. Here we see the founder of Save the Children say as much when she started the organization in post-World War I Europe. Now, of course, we have the Millennium Development Goals, which include a significant focus on children and international development. Strikingly, the focus on early childhood and education has led the Indonesian state and intergovernmentals to turn again to the women of Indonesia through the structure provided by PKK. And the number of women who are still in the lowest paying informal sector work is still very high. So my suggestion is that these things are related. Keeping the wages of women low serves other purposes, including the provision of low-cost ECCE programs. But as always, I'm left with mixed feelings about the role of PKK as a national organization of women to deliver low-cost community welfare for very little compensation. As I've reported elsewhere, one woman doing this kind of work told me that her payment would be in heaven. So she knew she was going to get very little pay for being involved with POUD programs in her neighborhood. I have argued elsewhere that this is the ethic of community support and the view that it is women's work to do it that makes PKK and these POUD programs work. But this comes at a cost to women. And recently I made a very strange discovery. Here's a piece that draws on my work to make the case that the work of young hackers in Indonesia is supported by the kind of community-based social reproduction work by women that is organized by PKK. To me, this is a sign of the importance and adaptability of community-based welfare, but it still relies on the unpaid or poorly paid work of women, as these authors note. And I know that Ibu Sri Marpinjum was meant to join me today, and I'm sorry that she couldn't be here, but she's done some important work on supporting the use of community organization through PKK and how it can be used for many local programs, not just in education, but in things like Kampung Cyber, which exists in Yogyakarta and is supported by the sort of community ethos that we see related to PKK. And while I cannot speak to what is happening with PKK right now in Indonesia, because I'm not looking at it these days, I expect that Indonesia is experiencing the same care crisis as the rest of the world. And I suspect that there's even more pressure on women to help deliver this care. And so I and others have returned to the unsolved problem of social reproduction. One way to think about this and the stubbornness of this problem is the perceived tension between love and money at the center of women's care work. We often think that what is done for love must not have a price attached to it. This binary choice between love or money can be mapped onto other binary oppositions. In my own work with another collaborator, Rachel Rosen, we've considered the question of how can we keep both women and children in the frame with equal respect and attention when we look at early childhood care and education. As I've suggested above, there's been a shift in development discourse from the emphasis on women to one that is child-centered. But there's a risk of seeing the interests of these two groups as being opposed. And this is an important question for feminists generally. How can we approach the questions of childcare, such as early childhood care and education, with a child-centered focus without exploiting the care labor of women? And this brings us to a central question. Why is it that we see women and mothers particularly as the best caregivers? One question has been that it's just a reflection of human nature, that women are natural caregivers because they are the ones who become pregnant and deliver children. This idea of the naturalness of women's caring labor is supported in everyday discourse by the organization of our politics and economics and by our belief systems. And we see it elaborated through stereotypes of what it means to be feminine versus what it means to be masculine. Here I've just captured some of these from a Google search. What each says is less important than the fact that they're all based on a dualistic model of opposition. Whatever is feminine is the opposite of what is masculine. As an anthropologist, I can tell you this is historically and culturally shaped. We know from other societies that this kind of binary opposition doesn't work. It's a modernist Western mode of thinking or an ontology, which has now been spread to the whole world. And so there's been a lot of academic attention to the effects of feminizing care labor. We can take from Nancy Folbre, a famous economist, the idea that those who provide care often suffer an economic penalty, a care penalty. Arlie Hochschild adds that those who are in caregiving professions are often required to exhibit and manage the emotions of a caregiver. That is, they are required to demonstrate forms of care like mother love in their jobs. So we can see a kind of reinforcing logic. Women are expected to do this work even as they suffer economically for it. And in doing it, they're expected to demonstrate the naturalized feminine characteristics of a caregiver that put them in this position in the first place. When we turn to the labor of ECCE, we can see how the feminization of care rooted in this binary is extended beyond the relationship between mother and child to that of any caregiving, including education. That means that these activities are understood to be feminine, and so those who engage in them are equally feminized. Of course, this is a problem when caregivers or teachers are men. Yet because of the naturalization of the binary opposition, this extension is commonplace and unquestioned. Not only is care labor feminized, but it is precarious. That is to say, it is typically low paid, unstable, often part-time work. Why, when we are in the middle of a care crisis, do we still pay those who deliver care so poorly? So I want to offer you an anthropological argument to help rethink the persistence of the feminization of care and the opposition of women's interests with children's, without resorting to naturalized depictions of mother love. Let me start with another kind of example. In Yogyakarta, there's a famous pasar Ngasem, where you can buy songbirds. Many of you will know how much the songs of birds are prized in Java. When I was living in Jogja, it was common to see the brightly colored cages raised high to encourage more song. There's a clear commercial value on the birds, and they're bought and sold for money at the market. Following Arjuna Padarai, we would say that this is a regime of value. A regime in this case refers to a historically and culturally specific form of value. And this is specific because we don't have this in Canada. We like birds, and some people own birds, but there's no market in songbirds the way there is in Java. We can contrast this regime of value with another, and that is the songbirds and their role in the forest ecosystem. Here's another way to think about value. Their work is not monetized. There's no cash value associated with it. In fact, it's often unrecognized. Yet the market at Pasar Ngasem entirely depends on these songbirds, and their work in supporting the health of the ecosystem is invisible to us because it exists in another regime of value. So in other words, songbirds represent two different regimes of values with different ways of understanding or accounting for their value. These values are not equivalent, and it's hard to even compare them. In fact, we would say the so-called natural value of songbirds is erased or missing. And we only recognize their value when it has a price on it in the market. And I want to particularly direct you to the important moment when the birds are diverted from the ecosystem to the market. The value of the songbird in the market depends on their availability in the forest. In fact, this little bird is endangered because people love it so much. So what if we take that idea of regimes of value to the question of the opposing interests of women as mothers with the interests of children? We can see that the regime of value that has been identified around the role of women and mothers is linked to their role in the home, as opposed to their role, as opposed to the market. Their value as a mother is based on tradition, as opposed to a future of progress. And their care labor is associated with love and not with work. So this is a regime, two regimes of value, again, like my first example. And here we see that the diversion of mother love from one regime into ECCE is affected through programs like PKK and ECCE. So this regime of value, I'm going to actually read part of this again because I skipped ahead a little bit. What if we take the idea of regimes of value to the question of the opposing interests of women as mothers and children? We can see that a regime of value has been identified around the role of women and mothers in homes. It is connected to tradition, to love, but not to money. This is the regime of value that is reproduced through programs like PKK. In contrast, a regime of value has been created through ECCE programs that focuses on the role of the child as a future worker in a market-based economy, a value that is monetized. These two regimes of value are built on that binary opposition that I identified above, and they exist in relationship to one another. They depend on one another. On one side, we have mother love, and on the other, we have future wage workers. The points of diversion are the programs like PKK and the ECCE programs it supports. The valued but unpaid love of the mother is diverted to support the child as a future worker. Like the existence of two regimes of value for songbirds, this is not a natural phenomenon. This is about power. As I have identified in my early work, exploiting mother love to support ECCE works for not only the Indonesian economy, but for the global political economy. And it comes at an economic cost to women who pay a care penalty. When we understand care labor as being in a separate regime of value from the economy itself, as with the songbirds in the forest, we do not recognize the true cost of that labor or of that bird. For materialist feminists like me, who have returned to social reproduction theory, it is because our current models of economy do not recognize and compensate the value of social reproduction and the labor it requires. This is a work of having and raising young humans. We do not exist without it, but our economic systems try to separate off that value and from that which is produced in the economy. And so I've used this idea of regimes of value to try and show that to you. The definition of value within a particular regime is not the result of natural forces, but instead an act of power and erasure. To be clear, I'm not arguing that we put a price on bodies and children. I'm arguing for new approaches to economy that recognize the importance of relationships between those who are young and their caregivers, between a regime of value based on love and one based on the market. So many scholars have taken up the idea of relationality recently. And anthropologists will tell you that we are defined as humans through our relationships and in terms of others. Yet for the most part, our political, legal, and economic systems are organized around the idea of individual humans. But what do we fail to see when we do that? There are many examples that point to the need to reject any clear, distinct boundary between work and love, between women and children, or between education and care. Will the young children in this photograph receive wages for the work they do, or will they be supporting the reproduction of a family, a household, a community? And after all, don't all humans provide care? Children, for example, receive care, but they also give care because they are members of households, families, compounds, villages, mosques, and churches. In fact, by definition, the category of a child is a relational one based on age, generation, and family. So in preparing this lecture, I was reminded of a famous study from anthropology. This is a work of Carol Stack, who looked at poor African Americans in a Chicago neighborhood. And she studied a set of households related by kinship to find what connected them. And it was the shared work of raising children. By focusing on the household, not the mother, not the husband, or the child, she was able to see all the relationships involved in social reproduction. Her examples remind me of many of the kampung households I've visited, where you'll find multiple generations and joint and extended households with married brothers and sisters, their children, and their parents living together. And this brings me finally to the Greek word oikos. It's the root word of both the English word for economy and for ecology. And in the classical Greek city-state, it referred to the household. So these are not separate regimes of value. They're all aspects of the same set of relations central to social reproduction. By valuing all of them, we avoid returning to that modernist binary that would oppose love with money, women with child. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you today. I'm very happy to answer any questions that you might have, and I hope I didn't go on too long. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ibu Yan, for your wonderful presentation. It's really giving me a lot of inspiration and really much mind-blowing. Thank you very much. I would like to invite all the participants who are already joining us today to have some question. If you like to deliver your question directly, you may raise your hand and using the button in your Zoom application. And if you hesitate to directly ask the question to the speaker, you may written down in the chat box. Okay, Ibu Yan, we have several questions, I guess, in the chat box. Let me read it for you. Oh, there's a comment from Ibu Susi Fauzia. The demand of caregiving for mothers are becoming too much since they are also demanded to work outside home in order to help the husband gaining income. Okay, and there is another comment. Oh, the same person from Ibu Susi Fauzia. In most cases, if the wage of a caretaker is more expensive than the salary earned by the working mother, then the mother will give up her job and become a full-time mother. Okay, I guess that's really much describe the situation of mother in Indonesia. I can see Dr. Helwiyah Makarim already raising her hand. You want to deliver your question directly, please, Dr. Helwiyah?
Yes, okay. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, Miss January and Miss Vina and the others. Actually, I'm so excited when you are talking about PKK or social family welfare because that's my research for dissertation. My research is about evaluation program for social welfare for early childhood education. And in the result, my research, the mother is so always take care and fluently to early childhood, but but it's less about the education for how to take care correctly, how to give the attention correctly, because the background is for, what is it in English, posyandu, because they less the education about that. So when we are talking about social welfare education, we are women development, love, care, and value each others very fluently. So my question: how to give the education correctly to take care and to build up about the early childhood education. Because until now, since 15 years, I'm still concerned with early childhood education for social welfare. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. And I think there is a question from Ibu Suzy Fauzi as well, and I'll try to answer both of them together if I can.
Yes, you may.
Yeah, so let me just start with the issue of the trying to balance work outside the home with work for PKK in the neighborhood. This is actually not that much different than what happens in this part of the world, where women have to make the same choice. If I work outside of the home, it may cost me more to find childcare, and so I won't take the job, right? And so there's always been this balance between having enough support for early childhood programs so that women can actually work outside the home effectively. So that's partly an answer to the first question in the comments. But to come to your question, so this is an interesting thing for me to say as an outsider about PKK, because as I said to you, many women I know think they don't like it. PKK is a burden for me. I work, and now I have to come home and I have to go to a PKK meeting and I have to help everybody in the neighborhood, and I don't have time for it. It's again, this tension and this balance. But PKK delivers this welfare to very local levels. And I will tell you, other parts of the world wish they had this kind of an organization to deliver social welfare. But the Indonesian government has historically never given enough money to actually make it worthwhile. If they would actually fund PKK and PKK women to stay at home in their neighborhoods to provide childcare, it would be an amazing program. This is my opinion. You can argue with me about it. My sense is, and this is to go to the rest of your question, I think the government understands how effective PKK is. That is why post-democratization, they dumped every program they could into it. Okay, so now you're doing post-Yandu, and now you're doing elder care, and now you're doing early childhood education and care, and now you're, because it's effective, but it is so under-resourced, so under-resourced. So, I mean, I think that that's the real thing I'm trying to say today. You have to see that you're really benefiting by keeping that so cheap and on the backs of women. If you would pay it effectively, you would get tremendous growth and tremendous economic growth if you would recognize what you can actually do with PKK if it was fully funded. Now to your other question, because they use it for everything, they make women who don't have any training in early childhood education and care deliver those programs. And so the quality is not as good. Although you must know and have seen, it's often the kindergarten teachers in the neighborhood or who are forced to do the ECCE work. And so they have the triple burden. They have a job, they have their own house, and now they're running this program as well, right? And when I was last looking at this work, there were programs for enriching the training of these women. But again, they don't have the time and they don't have the money to get there. Yeah, so I think my answer is a little frustrating on both counts. And the simple answer is more money. It's more complicated than that, but that's one answer.
Okay, thank you very much, Ibu Yan. And I hope that answer your question, Dr. Halwia.
Yes,
Okay.
can I start by the little?
Okay, yes. One more question.
Okay, but in PKK or social welfare, there are four programs. First for and the early childhood in the Pokja 2. That's the program, and they are focused for early childhood based on PKK program such as Posyandu and the others. So for how to how to make we open about the minds to the organization in social welfare, because they are always care about the children, but they don't care about the others. I mean, stakeholder or holistic in the early childhood education. Thank you.
You're welcome. I don't think I have a very good answer, except that I might say that, especially, so I'm talking specifically about the women who are delivering PAUD programs through PKK. This is not the same as the privatized programs and some of the formal programs, where I think that there's highly qualified staff delivering the programs. I think you and I are talking about these community programs, right? I just think at some level it's not fair to ask them to do that when they're doing it for little or no pay and with little or no training. I think that is the way to answer that, because I think actually the women I know from my time in Indonesia do want to do this well. They do think that their children should be supported and their communities should be supported, but it shouldn't be at the cost of everything else they do, right? And I think that is the fundamental problem. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I think there's a question in the chat that I have to read. It's in Indonesian, so I might need a little help.
Okay. Ibu Yan, should I translate it or?
Oh, sure. That would be helpful. I'm doing it, but I'm rusty, so I might need help.
Okay. Bu Yan, there is a question from Ashifa. She's actually asking you regarding the mother of ECCE or Lady Ambassador. Have you ever heard about it?
No, I mean, I know that.
Okay, maybe I should explain a little for you.
Yeah,
okay.
Please do go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm trying to read.
Bunda PAUD or Lady of Ambassador or Mother of ECCE is a wife from a major, for example, who is having to deliver ECCE program. So the wife of the mayor in one city is automatically becoming the ambassador of ECCE. And Miss Ashifa is asking you, what do you think about that concept of Lady of Ambassador in ECCE?
Thank you. All right, now I understand. Let me tell you that when I first started studying PKK, it was the wife of Suharto who was the head of PKK. And so the mirror image of the male administration all the way down was the head of Dharma Wanita and PKK. And so this is just, I would say, a holdover from that. And it's a great question because it touches on that whole idea of the binary that I've mentioned. So the male is in charge of public administration, and his wife, of course, will be in charge of the private domestic sphere, which is care and love. Now, some women, some wives of mayors like that job, but it's interesting that it is, and I'll use this word, naturalized, that of course they would be in charge of this because by marriage, this gives them a position of power, right? So yeah, it's a I would say it's a historical holdover, and it's a little bit problematic. Especially, I'll say this because I don't live in Indonesia, and I can get in trouble, and others might. Especially when we have a crop of highly educated women and men who have degrees in early childhood care and education, who have the skills and the abilities to run these programs, that instead the responsibility would be given to someone because they are a wife, right? Yeah, I assume that's what you're asking me about.
Thank you very much, Ibu Yan, for your answer. I would like to invite another question for the participant. Please do not hesitate. Since we only have one speaker here, I guess the committee will give us more time for this discussion session. If there is no question,
I think Ibu
it looks like there is a question.
Ibu Melati raised her hand.
Yes.
Okay, Madam Director. Ibu Melati, would you like to report your question directly, please?
Thank you, Ibu Asila.
You're
Can
welcome.
you hear my voice clearly?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ibu Yan, for your insightful presentation. My question is, healthy children come from a healthy mother. not only physically, but particularly mentally or psychologically. What is your opinion about this? And what is your recommendation for us as a mother, as a woman, and also for the parents and stakeholders, as well as the educators in Indonesia? Thank you.
Oh, thank you. That's a hard question. Okay. Let me say that one of the things I'm trying to suggest to you is that there's actually an organization, there's the possibility to recognize a kind of holistic approach, as you're suggesting, that's already in place. In fact, there are mental health services that are delivered through PKK, no? But if we said that it's not that we want to center the child, and it's not that we want to center the mother, but we want to center their healthy relationship. What kinds of supports and what kind of resources will we get to accomplish that? So you've asked me to talk beyond my own expertise around, about mental health and psychology, but I do know that mothers who are happily engaged in their child rearing, but also have sources of income and enough to eat and to clothe themselves and to take care of themselves, these are some of the foundational parts of supporting mental health in a very holistic sense, right? I mean, I think it's worthwhile for me, again, as an outsider, to say, I don't think that Indonesians realize the power that you have in that form of organization. You could never have PKK in Canada. Couldn't do it. People would say, I don't care about those people down the road. Why should I worry about my neighbor? They're on their own. Because you have this organization and this commitment to supporting one another, it can be the platform for supporting holistic mental health services at a local community level. But I'll come back to the thing I'm going to say over and over again. It has to be fully funded. And you have to see this as the engine of growth for Indonesia and the engine of growth for communities. Not that, you know, do it as cheaply as you can and we'll talk about science and technology and all those things. If you start here, you will build the healthy relationships that you want. That is what I would say.
Thank you for your brief and clear answer, Ibu Yan. I do believe we have still participants who want to ask. Ibu Susi Fauzia. Please,
Yes.
Ibu Susi.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Asila. Okay, one question to Ms. Yan. Okay, so it's very interesting to follow the discussion. And for me, related to your explanation about economy as well as about the social culture in Indonesia related to the gender. Now, is it possible, since in Indonesia we have PKK, then the PKK is used to become like, an institution or an institution that is funded not only by the government, but also funded by the community, so that the PKK can provide a child care facility. Okay, because in Indonesia, just like in my community, just like in my place, the cost of daycare is very expensive. So it's more expensive than you employ a caretaker. It's very expensive. So I'm just thinking. So, for example, if the PKK has has the authority to open a daycare facility, right? So maybe the cost will be less expensive, and then the family can just pay the worker in PKK. Okay, so the worker in PKK, for example, if they are housewives, then they can earn more money. Yes. And we, the working mother, we don't need to to find daycare facility that is very expensive. I mean, is it possible or not? Yes, thank you.
Thank you for your question. In fact, that's what I'm proposing, that Indonesia has a ready organization to do just that. So, but I mean, and it is happening in some ways, but the fact that it's not supported means low quality delivery of early childhood, and it's not even open and useful to working women. So one of the pictures I showed you is actually from a rural village south of Jogja. And they had started an ECCE program. It was very terrific, but they're all agricultural workers. So they had to actually leave the field to come to, the house of the ERTE to put on a 2-hour ECCE program every 3 days. It didn't really support childhood education, and it took away from their ability to earn money. But if you did have women who wanted to stay and do that and earn money to provide daycare to other women who could keep their jobs, yeah, I think that's a great solution. It keeps mothers at home, it keeps kids in their community, and it lowers the cost, but not in the way it has been done, which is no money. As I talk about this, and I'm not doing research in Indonesia as I was before. I'm doing research here in Southern Alberta, but I am aware of the political controversy about the removal of the subsidy on rice. So what the Indonesian government has done is subsidize rice because it's important for people to eat. And people think that's a good thing. If you eat, then you're going to work and you're going to, the economy will boom. This is no different than that. If you support these things, then you have workers who are free to earn wages, right? So I think you're right, Ibu Susi. That's a way this could be done, but you'd have to take it seriously. And then the other thing is you would have to let experts support it and not just government officials. It would have to be experts in ECCE who came and supported local women delivering these programs. This goes back to the question before, so that they're not low quality, that they actually have the tools that they need to deliver it.
Thank you very much, Ibu Yan. Since we have several questions in the chat box, maybe we should move to the chat box. There is a question from Ibu Siti Nurhayati. Ibu Yan, I'm from an organization for ECE educator, Himpaudi. He have members that are also as Kader Posyandu, as you mentioned before, that they are housewives with non-educational qualification for ECCE. How can we as an organization maintain the problem to have a qualified educator?
It's such a good question. And I know a little bit about Himpaudi. So when I was doing research, I would talk to the women who were doing these local programs, and some of them knew about it, but they didn't go to the trainings, or they had no time to go to the trainings, or had no funds for the transportation. So it's a real concern. I will say again, though, that the Posyandu, I don't know if everyone knows this, has won awards globally because of its delivery of healthcare at the most local levels, which is a really wonderful thing, right? But the Posyandu, at least in the old days, would have a doctor come occasionally, would have a trained nurse come occasionally. So maybe one of the ways to think about this, and it builds on the last question, is instead of expecting these local community women, who are often quite poor, to come to Himpaudi and to receive trainings, if the trained educators could go to them and be there, not all the time, but to make visits and support them in place. I think that there are experts here who could answer this question better than me, because there are so many people now who are trained and skilled in this work. And there's a growing labor force, I assume, in Indonesia, of people who know and understand quality ECCE and can deliver it. So the question is how to connect them to these women who, as I say, don't have the time or space or money to take advantage of it.
Okay, thank you very much, Ibu Yan. There is also one more question in the chat box, and I think it's a very personal question. Would you like to answer it? from Catherine L. Andomang. As a solo parent, how do we manage to taking care of household work, taking care of children to reduce the stress without hiring a nanny?
I don't know. And that is a very hard thing to do. This will not really answer your question, but let me tell you what I tell people here in Canada. So the regime of value, if you'll use my terminology, the regime of value around child rearing and family in Canada, most of North America, is a husband, a wife, and children in a house alone, right? That is the historic model that we've had for a very long time. It's really hard to do. If you look around the world, the vast majority, and through history, the vast majority of societies have never had just a couple and children in a single home. It's always been an extended family. That's what makes it easy to do social reproduction. So if it's hard to do it with a couple and their children, how much harder when it is a solo parent? So I'm recognizing your trouble. That is a really hard thing to do. Social reproduction is facilitated by, it is supported by relationships. And if you don't have those relationships, that burden is tremendously heavy. Yeah. So I wish I had a better answer for you.
Thank you, Ibu Yan. Since we have to getting close to 9:30, maybe we have to do a wrap up. I don't want to wrap up all the presentation or the topic today, but I would like to deliver one question as a wrap up to Ibu Yan, maybe. Since your presentation is talking about regime of values, in Indonesia we have very much moral values, a lot of moral values that we have to take care of. And you mentioned that the values is contributing to the inequality of ECCE. How do you suggest the Indonesian ECCE teachers to tackle this issue?
So you have not said what moral values, but I can guess what you're hinting at.
Payment in heaven, something like that.
Say again.
Payment in heaven, as
yes,
you already mentioned. Yes, one of the values.
Yes, no, it's true. I don't know that there's an easy answer here either. How do I want to address that? If we talk about the idea of moral values, these are what any society holds dear, what they think is the most valuable. One of the things I'm suggesting is that we actually have values that we separate out from the market. And we're uncomfortable when they are made to have a monetary value, right? And so this can be about our religious belief system, right? That should have nothing to do with money. There should be nothing about money in relationship to that. And so we create sort of a boundary around it and say, this is sacred, and these morals are really important. And over there's the market. My example is to say that often those kinds of moral boundaries are much more fluid. There's more holes between them than we want to acknowledge. And I'll tell you this, as an anthropologist, the only way we make changes in that is by humans deciding they want to do it differently. And so, which it's not a great, doesn't make you feel good because it's hard to get humans to agree and to do things together. But that is the way to manage that. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think it is complicated because so much of our ideas about what it means to be a mother, for example, is reinforced by particular moral beliefs. And what I want to suggest to you, though, is those can change without challenging anybody's religious belief system. That's actually possible.
Thank you very much, Ibu Yan, for your great answer. I think that's the end of our discussion session for this wonderful discussion. Thank you very much to all the participants who's actively engaged in this discussion. And back to you, to Mbak Anissa.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Yuberi and Miss Asila Priyangi for wonderful session. And we get many information to we have learned for our speaker. Okay, now we invite Professor Vina to give certificate for our speaker. Professor Vina, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mbak Anissa. Unfortunately, it will be an online certificate, but I just would like to highlight few points from the discussion, Professor Newberry. I think the presentation that you deliver and also the question raised by participants, for me, sort of like demonstrating the pervasiveness of gender ideology. And I think yeah, economic is always, we always link everything with economics, but probably in order to sort of like disrupt the practice of PKK like the one that we have at the moment, it's very important to also dismantle gender ideology, because I think it is very much rootly held by the people in Indonesia, whether it is in the government and sometimes among the members of the PKK themselves. That's why they sort of like internalize the whole process. And, like you said, perhaps in any other part of the world, this kind of practice will not happen. So I think the homework is not only like advocating the government, but perhaps more to like advocating the people, the members of the PKK, about this whole notion of traditional gender ideology that is very strongly held by all the people. Yeah, so again, thank you very much. The certificate is ready, Mbak. So again, we are very honored to have you today. And I think what we are discussing today is really just a beginning, hopefully to us to be able to reflect more on the existing practice that we hold on so much, and perhaps sometimes it's time to question and to evaluate these practices. Yeah. Please, Mbak Anissa.
Thank you so much, Professor. Please, this is for Professor January for a certificate. Thank you so much for your wonderful session, your presentation. Okay, the next agenda, we will give announcement for you. And before that, we invite Mr. Itfuti to give closing remark for today meeting. Please, Mr. Itfuti. Times is your. Okay, Mr.
Okay. Good evening for Prof. Jen Newberries. I know there's but first also I would like to respect to our director, Prof. Vina, have initiative to conduct this international webinar for sharing knowledge for a better relationship between women and children. I know in Canada it's 9:30 at night, and then in Indonesia it's 9:30 in the morning. So thank you very much for your contribution, for your times, because we are really different in 12 hours. So even we invite the participant, they are also early come to this what we say international webinar. We learn a lot about from you. Even I think even me or Indonesian people or Indonesian stakeholder of CCE not know much about PKK. And from you, we can learn about PKK, and also we know how about the woman supply for the development of the society, and women provide love and care to the children. You have many books, and the role of mother, a proper role, work for mother. Mother as the ibu tangga, as the housewife, and mother juga also work as the PKK, and mother like we say, Dharma Wanita also. So 3 kinds of roles of the woman in Indonesia. And you also mentioned about the local social reproduction from the woman. It's a very I don't think so. Maybe in Southeast Asia or most of the country, most the same like Indonesia also, because we are in the developing country. So the relationship between mother and children's, mother with society, it's still different from one to another country, but it's still similar. And then women as entrepreneurs. Women should looking for the money to open their entrepreneur in Indonesia. Now we focus also about the regime of value of relationship between PKK as a home, as the tradition and love is at home. We have love, we have the tradition. In the markets for the children as a market, and the for purity and the work in the future. This is the value of the regimes. As and one sentences that I learned from you is human are made through relation of care. Is very good for us. The good relations. Humans are made through relation of care. So we should care each other in the society, in family, in other. So relationship of care is very important. And many questions from the participant. And again, I would like to thank to your contribution. Time is different and much good, what we say, experience, knowledge sharing with us and with the participant. At the end, I would like to declare Unpacking relationship between women and children in ECCE is officially closed. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Futi, for your closing remark. So, ladies and gentlemen, I give there are some information that you would like to share about how to get certificate. Please you can access this link, and please feel free to access link feedback to get certificate. You can access the link feedback until 26 December, and you can access certificate for January, and you can screenshot this information. Okay, and then you can screenshot this information so you don't missing it. Okay. Dear all participants, I think we are on the last session. I'm Anissa. I'm sorry for my mistake. Thank you for your attention, and stay tuned on our media social on Instagram and website for any update of our program and event. Happy National Mothers and Women Day, and have wonderful New Year. And for all the colleagues who celebrates Christmas, wishing you the best Christmas ever. Okay, see you in the next webinar. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ibu Yan. Thank you so much. Okay.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care. Selamat malam, Bu.
Selamat malam. Selamat pagi.
Selamat pagi.
Terima kasih, Bu.
Thank you so much.
Selamat malam.
Selamat malam.
Duh.
It's time to open our eyes to a bright and promising future. We'll rise to the call teaching everyone to learn. Through science, health, and technology, we will share our expertise. By promoting knowledge and policies, we can build a better world. Let us take a stand for our visions alone, making future plans for the people to grow in a life filled with happiness and faith. Hear us Savior, building the future is our legacy. We'll achieve our goals through partnership, creating opportunities. By working hand in hand, we can accomplish all our dreams. For a better quality of life is now within our reach. Let us take a stand for our visions alone, making future plans for the people to grow in a life filled with happiness and faith. Hear us Savior, building the future is our legacy. Let us take a stand for our visions alone, making future plans for the people to grow in a life filled with happiness and faith. Hear us Savior, building the future.
Mulut. Udah.